Apache woman had no shelter for her cattle in the rain until a mountain man said, "Come with me." Rain fell in heavy sheets over the small Apache settlement. The sky was a dull gray, and the wind whispered through the sparse trees surrounding the land. Maria wiped the water from her face and squinted at the clouds above. The storm had come quickly, faster than she had expected, and now she could see the first drops soaking the dry earth. Her small herd of cattle was restless, shifting their weight from hoof to hoof in the muddy pen. She could hear the low moans and snorts of the frightened animals as they crowded together, seeking shelter from the rain. The pen had been her responsibility for years. It was a simple structure made of rough wooden posts and thin planks, barely strong enough to keep the cattle from wandering off. Its roof had holes, and Maria knew that it would not hold against the heavy downpour. Water was already seeping through the gaps, dripping onto the animals and the muddy ground below. She bent down to push a cow gently away from the wet corner. The animal shivered, and Maria could feel its fear. She sighed, brushing mud from her hands, feeling the cold wetness soak through her clothes. Maria had grown up here, learning the ways of the land from her father and grandmother. She knew the mountains, the forests, and the streams, like the lines on her hands. But even with that knowledge, nature could still be harsh, unpredictable, and unforgiving. This storm was a reminder of that. She glanced around at her small homestead. A few wooden sheds, a garden struggling against the rain, and the pen where her cattle huddled. Everything seemed fragile against the storm. She tried to make the pen stronger. She ran back to her small shed, grabbed a few boards and nails, and returned to the structure. The wind pushed against her as she worked, the rain soaking her through and through. Her fingers, stiff from the cold, fumbled with the nails and hammer. Each strike sounded dull against the wet wood. She managed to cover some of the larger gaps, but the roof still leaked in multiple places. She paused for a moment, leaning on her hammer, and looked at the sky. She felt small against such a storm, and for a brief second she felt a pang of despair. Maria knew she could not stay in despair for long. The cattle depended on her. She returned to the pen, checking each animal. One cow had slipped in the mud and was lying on its side, soaked and trembling. Maria reached out, gently stroking its head to calm it. She whispered to it, telling it everything would be okay, though she herself was unsure if that was true. The herd had grown over the years. Some of the cattle were hers, raised from calves. Others had been lent to her by neighbors who trusted her care. Each one felt like family, and she could not bear to see them suffer. The rain grew heavier, and the wind picked up, shaking the pen as if it might collapse. Maria's heart pounded in her chest. She had seen storms like this before, and she knew the damage they could cause. She thought back to a storm the previous year, when much of the settlement had been flooded. She had lost part of her garden and had to rebuild the pen almost entirely. That memory made her shiver, not from the cold, but from worry. She did not want a repeat of that disaster. She did not want to lose her cattle. They were not just animals. They were her livelihood, her responsibility, and in many ways her companions. As she worked, she remembered hearing stories about a man who lived further up in the mountains. People called him Jack, though few had ever met him. He was a mountain man, a solitary figure who had lived alone for many years, surviving through his knowledge of the land. He was rumored to be skilled at building, hunting, and protecting animals. Most people avoided him, thinking he was gruff or unapproachable. But Maria wondered if he could help her. Could someone like him offer shelter for her cattle, even just for this storm? She hesitated. She had always been independent, proud in her work. Asking for help was not something she did lightly. But as the rain soaked her and the wind tore at her hair and clothes, she realized she might have no choice. The pen creaked dangerously, and one of the cows moaned loudly as water dripped onto its back. Maria swallowed hard. She could not let her pride prevent her from protecting the herd. After a moment of thought, she made the decision. She would try to find this man. She would ask for his help. Even if he refused, she would know she had done everything she could. She grabbed her raincoat, pulled her hood over her head, and stepped into the muddy path that led toward the mountains. Each step was heavy, sinking into the mud, her boots sliding on the slick ground. The rain poured down relentlessly, but she kept going, her mind focused on the herd and the hope that someone might help. As she walked, Maria's thoughts drifted. She thought about her life here, about the generations of her family who had lived on this land. She thought about the lessons her grandmother had taught her: how to read the weather, how to find food in the wild, how to respect the strength of nature while surviving it. She thought about her father's hands, rough and calloused from years of work, and how he would have approached this storm with determination and skill. She felt a sense of both comfort and longing for those who were no longer there to guide her. The path to the mountains was narrow, lined with thick bushes and tall trees that bent under the weight of the rain. The sound of the storm surrounded her, the constant patter of water on leaves, the roar of distant thunder, the occasional crack of a falling branch. Maria moved carefully, aware that one wrong step could lead to injury or worse. She paused at times to catch her breath, to watch for obstacles, and to listen for any sign of wildlife that might be frightened by the storm. The forest felt alive and unpredictable, much like her life had been on this land. Hours seemed to pass as she climbed higher into the mountains. Her coat was soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, and her boots caked with mud. Yet she pressed on, driven by determination and the thought of her cattle waiting in the pen below. She thought about how fragile her efforts had been so far. The pen, though built with care, was no match for this storm. Without help, she feared for what might happen by nightfall. She had to keep moving. She had to try. Finally, after what felt like an endless climb, Maria reached a small clearing. The rain was no less fierce here, but she saw the faint outline of a cabin in the distance, nestled against the mountainside. Smoke rose from a chimney, small but steady. Her heart leapt. Could this be the place she had heard about? Could this be the man who might help her? She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and started walking toward the cabin, calling out softly to announce her presence. Inside the cabin, Jack looked up from his workbench. He was a tall man with weathered features, his hands rough but steady. He had lived alone for many years, and his eyes held the quiet strength of someone who had seen storms, wild animals, and the harshness of nature. He listened as Maria approached, her voice trembling slightly but carrying the weight of urgency. She explained her situation, her herd of cattle, the failing pen, and the relentless storm. She spoke with honesty, without exaggeration, and with the quiet dignity of someone who had done all they could on their own. Jack remained silent for a moment, studying her. The rain continued to pound the roof of the cabin, filling the air with the steady rhythm of the storm. Finally, he nodded slowly, as if recognizing both her determination and the seriousness of her problem. Come with me, he said, his voice calm but firm. Maria felt a surge of relief mixed with nervous anticipation. She did not know what lay ahead, but for the first time since the storm began, she felt a sense of hope. And so Maria took her first step toward help, toward shelter, and toward the possibility of saving her cattle from the merciless rain. She did not know the challenges that still awaited her, But she knew that she was no longer facing the storm alone. Maria followed Jack through the rain-soaked clearing, her boots sinking into the soft mud with each step. The cabin behind them grew smaller, almost hidden by the trees and thick brush of the mountainside. Jack moved steadily, confidently, as if he had walked this path hundreds of times before. Maria struggled to keep up, her lungs burning from the climb, her coat soaked through, her hands cold and stiff, yet she felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time since the storm had begun, she was no longer alone. The forest around them seemed alive in the storm. Leaves rustled, water dripped from branches, and distant thunder rumbled like the growl of some great beast. Maria kept her eyes on the narrow trail, careful not to slip. At times, she had to step over fallen branches or duck under low-hanging limbs. Jack occasionally paused, pointing out spots where the ground was especially slippery or where rocks jutted out dangerously. His voice was calm even in the pouring rain, and Maria found herself silently admiring his quiet confidence. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" Jack asked after a while, not looking at her but watching the trail. His voice was low, steady, and carried the kind of authority that did not demand attention but earned it. Maria hesitated. She wanted to answer, but she didn't know how much to share with this stranger. Finally, she said, "I've lived here all my life." "The land is my home. But storms like this, they remind you how small you really are." Jack nodded slightly. "Nature doesn't wait for anyone. You adapt, or you get hurt." His words were simple, almost like a statement of fact, but Maria felt their weight. She knew he spoke from experience. She had heard stories about the man, the solitary life he had chosen, the years he had spent living in the mountains, surviving off the land. Yet now, walking beside him, seeing how carefully he navigated the terrain, she understood it in a way stories could never convey. The climb grew steeper. Rainwater ran in small streams along the path, making it slick and treacherous. Maria's boots slipped several times, and she had to grab onto tree roots to steady herself. Jack extended a hand when she wobbled, and though she hesitated, she took it. His grip was firm but gentle, steadying her. For a moment, Maria felt a quiet bond forming, not of friendship yet, but of trust. As they climbed higher, the rain showed no sign of stopping. The forest thickened, the trees growing taller and closer together. Jack moved silently, his steps sure and unhurried. He pointed out hidden dangers, a loose rock that could roll underfoot, a tree root slick with water, a branch that could snag clothing. Maria listened carefully, following his instructions. Every detail seemed important. She realized that survival here depended on paying attention, on learning from someone who understood the land deeply. After what felt like hours of careful climbing, they reached a narrow ridge. The view was breathtaking, even in the rain. The mountains stretched out endlessly, their peaks hidden in mist and clouds. Below, the forest seemed to stretch forever, a patchwork of green and brown, broken only by streams and rocky outcrops. Maria paused to catch her breath, awed by the sight. She had lived in these mountains all her life, but from this angle, in the midst of a storm, the world felt larger, wilder, and more alive than she had ever imagined. Jack waited patiently, leaning against a tree. He said nothing, only watching her take in the view. Maria felt a strange sense of gratitude. He could have been impatient, rushing her, but he moved with the calm certainty of someone who understood patience and timing. She realized that this was part of what made him different. He had spent years in solitude, learning not only survival but observation, care, and respect for the natural world. Finally, Maria spoke. "Your place, is it far?" she asked, shivering slightly. Jack smiled faintly, a brief hint of warmth in his otherwise serious expression. "Not far, just over the ridge. You'll see it soon." His words were simple, but Maria felt relief. Each step forward felt lighter, as though hope itself was easing the weight on her shoulders. The path wound around the ridge, narrowing in places to barely more than a foot of dirt and rock. Maria's heart pounded with each careful step. Rainwater ran down the slope on one side, the drop sudden and unforgiving. She kept her eyes on Jack, following his footsteps exactly, trusting him completely. He seemed to move instinctively, almost like the trail was part of him, guiding him as much as he guided them. As they descended into a small hollow, the forest began to open slightly. Maria could see a structure ahead, partially hidden behind thick trees. It was modest, made of rough timber, but sturdy. A plume of smoke rose from a small chimney, the scent of burning wood warm and comforting even in the rain. Her heart leapt. Could this be the place? The man who had promised shelter for her cattle? Jack approached the cabin carefully, checking the ground around it for hazards. He opened the door and stepped inside, motioning for Maria to follow. The interior was simple but functional. A wood stove sat in one corner, warming the space, while shelves along the walls held tools, supplies, and a few personal items. It smelled faintly of wood smoke, earth, and something else. Order and care. Maria felt a wave of gratitude mixed with awe. The man had built this place with skill and thought. "Wait here," Jack said, and Maria nodded, watching as he went outside again. She could see the rain still pounding the earth, water streaming off the roof. He disappeared for a few minutes, then returned, leaving a small path behind the cabin. Maria followed, curious and nervous. At the end of the path was a covered pen, small but solid, enough to hold several animals safely. The roof was strong, the sides reinforced with thick planks, and the ground was dry, slightly elevated to prevent flooding. Maria felt her chest tighten with relief. She could hardly believe it. Her herd would be safe here. It's perfect," she said, almost whispering. Jack nodded. "It's not mine to give, but it will keep them dry. That's what matters right now." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of someone who had spent a lifetime solving problems through skill and care. She spent the next moments preparing the pen. Jack guided her, showing her how to secure the gates and move the cattle carefully to prevent injury. Maria followed his instructions, amazed at his knowledge and precision. Even in the storm, the cattle seemed to sense safety, moving calmly under his watchful eye. Maria felt a mixture of awe and gratitude. She realized that this man, who had lived alone for so long, understood the animals, the land, and the storms in a way she had never experienced before. As the rain continued to fall, Maria and Jack worked together in silence, moving the cattle into the shelter, one by one. Maria felt a sense of relief she had not known in hours. The cows were safe, dry, and calm. She could hear the steady sound of water hitting the roof, but inside the pen, there was quiet. She finally allowed herself a small smile, exhausted but grateful. After the last cow was settled, Maria turned to Jack. Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. He nodded, acknowledging her gratitude without much comment. He seemed to understand that actions mattered more than words. Maria felt a deep respect for him. Here was a man who had chosen a life of solitude, yet he was willing to help someone in need. She did not take it lightly. For the first time that day, Maria felt hope. She realized that even in the harshest storms, help could come from unexpected places. She had taken a risk, trusting a stranger, and it had paid off. The storm still raged outside, but inside the pen there was warmth, safety, and quiet order. Maria stood for a moment watching her cattle settle, and she thought about the lessons she had already begun to learn, about trust, patience, and the quiet power of experience. And as the rain poured down around them, Maria felt a quiet determination. She would remember this day, the kindness of a stranger, and the strength of her own resolve. The storm was far from over, but she knew that together she and the mountain man could face it, and perhaps even learn something valuable along the way. The morning after the storm, the rain had finally stopped. The clouds were breaking, revealing pale sunlight that made the wet leaves glisten. Maria stood by the small pen, watching her cattle move quietly, shaking off water and mud. Their calmness was a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous day, and it brought a sense of relief to her heart. She could see that they were safe, and she could finally breathe. Jack stepped out of his cabin, brushing the last drops of rain from his coat. He watched Maria for a moment, quiet, his eyes calm and steady. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low and deliberate. Maria nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. She knew that today would be about more than just shelter. She would learn, she would observe, and perhaps she would understand what it meant to live in harmony with the land. They set off together, moving through the forest toward a section of the mountains Jack called his supply trail. The ground was still wet and slippery, but the rain had stopped, and the path was clearer now. Birds cautiously returned to the trees, their calls adding life to the quiet morning. Maria felt her spirits lift. The forest was alive, full of subtle sounds and smells, and she realized that she had never truly noticed them in her daily routine back at her home. Here, everything seemed more vivid, more immediate. Jack moved silently ahead, stopping occasionally to point out natural features. "See that tree?" he said, gesturing to a large oak. "Ah, it's hollow underneath. You could use it for water collection or small animals if you need it. The land always provides. You just have to notice it." Maria leaned closer, peering under the tree. A small pool of clear water had collected inside the hollow, untouched and fresh. She felt a sense of wonder. She had grown up among these mountains, yet she had never thought to see them in this way, full of possibilities, full of solutions if you paid attention. As they continued, Jack showed her ways to move quietly, to avoid startling animals, to watch for signs of danger or opportunity. He spoke little, but each word carried weight. Maria listened carefully, following his lead, absorbing each lesson. She realized that survival was not just about reacting. It was about observation, planning, and patience. These were lessons she could take back to her herd, to her small settlement, and even to her own daily life. After an hour of careful walking, they reached a ridge overlooking a small valley. The view took Maria's breath away. Rolling hills stretched into the distance, dotted with trees, streams, and rocky outcrops. A river snaked through the valley, its water sparkling in the morning light. She could see patches of her own land in the distance, faint and familiar, yet somehow distant from this higher perspective. She felt small and yet connected to the vastness around her. Jack did not speak immediately. He leaned on a walking stick, surveying the valley with the calm patience of someone who had spent decades learning its patterns. Maria watched him, noticing the way he moved, the way he observed the land without rushing, without forcing anything. There was a quiet skill in his actions, a confidence born from experience and respect. She felt both admiration and a desire to learn more. Finally, he spoke. "Dewey, the pen yesterday," he said, "was enough for the storm. But you need something more permanent." "Ah, something that can withstand wind, rain, and time." Maria nodded, understanding. A pen he had offered was a temporary refuge, but she would need to build or adapt something at home. She felt a mixture of hope and determination. She had learned from the storm, and now she could learn from him. Jack led her down into the valley, along a narrow trail that wound through rocks and brush. The path was uneven, and Maria had to watch her step carefully. He moved confidently, placing his feet with precision, stepping around rocks and roots. Maria followed closely, aware that one wrong move could mean a fall or injury. Yet she felt safe with him guiding the way. His presence was steadying, reassuring, and strangely comforting. Along the trail, Jack paused to point out certain plants and features. "This one," he said, touching a small bush, "makes good rope. And these roots," he added, pointing to another plant, "can be used for tying or even reinforcing structures. You'd be surprised how much the land provides if you know where to look." Maria nodded, absorbing the knowledge. She had grown up in these mountains, but she had never thought to see them as a source of tools and solutions. It was a new way of seeing, a new way of understanding her world. As they moved deeper into the valley, they approached a small clearing where Jack had built a more permanent shelter for livestock. Unlike the temporary pen from yesterday, this one was elevated on wooden beams, with a solid roof and strong walls. It was modest, functional, and built to last. Maria's eyes widened in admiration. She could see the care and thought that had gone into its construction. The animals inside moved calmly, their heads turning toward the visitors with curiosity rather than fear. Jack gestured for Maria to come closer. "Bah. This is what I mean," he said. "You build with the land in mind, with respect for what you're trying to protect. You don't just throw wood together, you think about stability, safety, and longevity." Maria studied the shelter carefully, noticing the angles of the roof, the placement of the beams, and the raised floor. She felt a sense of awe. The man had not just built a structure, he had built a solution, a sanctuary. He handed her a small hammer and a few nails. "Want to try?" he asked. Maria hesitated, then nodded. She approached a loose plank on the side of the shelter and began to secure it under his guidance. Her hands were wet and cold, and her movements were stiff at first. But with Jack's patient instructions, she began to feel more confident. Each nail she drove into the wood felt like a small victory, a step toward understanding the skill and care that went into building something that could withstand storms. As they worked, Jack spoke quietly about his life in the mountains. He told her about the years he had spent alone, the lessons he had learned from the land, and the mistakes that had taught him more than his successes. Maria listened, fascinated. She could see how much knowledge and experience went into his calm demeanor, his careful movements, and his ability to survive in a place that many would find harsh and unforgiving. The sun began to break through the clouds, casting golden light over the clearing. The rain had stopped entirely, leaving everything fresh and clean. Maria looked around, taking in the shelter, the valley, and the forest beyond. She realized that she had learned more in these hours than she had in years of living on her own land. She felt gratitude, not just for the shelter, but for the knowledge, guidance, and patience Jack had shared with her. By the time they returned to the cabin, the cattle in the pen behind it were calm and content. Maria felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had moved through the storm, trusted a stranger, learned from him, and seen a new way of living in harmony with the land. She knew that she could take these lessons back to her own homestead, improving her pen, caring for her herd more effectively, and even teaching others what she had learned. Jack watched her quietly as she tended to her cattle. He said little, only observing her actions, correcting gently when needed, and letting her take the lead when she felt confident. Maria appreciated this balance. She felt empowered, not just helped. She realized that survival, trust, and skill were intertwined, and that she could face challenges with both courage and knowledge. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Maria and Jack shared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and fresh water. They sat in quiet companionship, the sound of the forest around them providing a gentle background. Maria felt a sense of peace she had not known in weeks. The storm was behind her, the cattle were safe, and she had learned something invaluable about trust, skill, and the quiet strength of a man who had lived closely with the mountains for years. Finally, as afternoon approached, Maria knew it was time to return to her own land. She packed a few essentials and prepared to leave. Jack gave her a final piece of advice. Remember what you've learned here. Observation, care, patience. The land will provide if you respect it, and your animals will thrive if you do the same. Maria nodded, feeling the truth of his words in her bones. She said her thanks deep and sincere, knowing that this day would stay with her forever. Hours back to her homestead. Her steps lighter than before, her mind clear, and her heart full. The mountains seemed less intimidating now, less vast, and more like teachers than obstacles. Maria knew that challenges would come again, storms, wind, uncertainty, but she felt ready. She had learned from Jack, she had trusted in his guidance, and she had discovered a new strength within herself. And so, with the valley behind her and the mountains stretching into the distance, Maria walked back to her land, ready to apply the lessons she had learned, ready to face the future with quiet confidence, and ready to ensure that her cattle and herself would always find safety no matter the storm. Maria returned to her own land the next day, carrying not only the small supplies Jack had given her, but also a sense of purpose and determination. The morning sun shone on the wet fields, casting a gentle light over the mud and puddles left by the storm. Her cattle were still in the pen, calm and safe, but the pen itself needed attention. She could see the weak spots clearly now, the holes in the roof, the warped planks on the sides, and the low areas where water had collected. She had learned much from Jack, and today she was determined to put that knowledge into practice. She started with the roof, gathering boards and beams she had stored for emergencies. Her hands moved with precision, guided by the memory of Jack's instructions. She remembered how he had placed the beams to create a slight slope, allowing rainwater to run off instead of collecting in one spot. She measured carefully, secured planks, and tested the angles to make sure the water would not pool again. It was hard work, her muscles aching from lifting the wet boards, but she felt satisfaction with every nail she hammered in. As she worked, her mind replayed the lessons she had learned on the mountain. Jack's words came back to her. Observation, care, patience. The land will provide if you respect it. She realized that the storm had not been just a challenge, it had been a teacher. The weak pen had shown her the limits of her previous knowledge, and Jack had shown her how to improve it. Now every board she placed felt like a step toward mastery, a way to protect not only her animals but her own livelihood. Her neighbor, an older man named Thomas, walked over to watch her work. He had always admired Maria's dedication, but today he seemed genuinely curious. "Looks like you've learned a lot," he said, his voice carrying the gentle humor of someone used to hard work. Maria smiled, wiping her wet hands on her coat. "Yes," she replied. "I spent some time with a man who knows the mountains better than anyone. He showed me ways to protect the herd and work with the land." Thomas nodded, impressed. "Good. You always take care of your animals, but it's nice to see you learning new ways, too." Once the roof was secure, Maria turned her attention to the sides of the pen. She replaced warped planks with fresh wood, ensuring that the walls were sturdy and straight. She dug small trenches around the edges to channel rainwater away from the pen, remembering how Jack had used natural slopes and elevation to keep water from pooling. Every adjustment she made reflected the knowledge she had absorbed, turning a simple structure into a strong, reliable shelter. By midday, Maria paused to catch her breath and drink some water. She looked at her cattle, now calm and dry under the improved roof. She felt a sense of pride swelling in her chest. They were safe, and she had done it herself. But more than that, she felt a deeper understanding of her land, her animals, and her own capabilities. She had learned that survival was not just about reacting to storms, but about preparation, observation, and care. As she rested, Maria thought about her own life and the community around her. She realized that this knowledge could help more than just her herd. If she shared what she had learned with others, they could all be better prepared for the storms that inevitably came each year. She imagined teaching her neighbors how to reinforce their pens, how to use the land wisely, and how to protect their animals. The thought filled her with purpose. She had gained not just skill, but responsibility. Maria worked through the afternoon, reinforcing every weak point she could find. She tested the doors, making sure they closed tightly, and inspected the corners for potential leaks. She moved slowly, methodically, taking her time to ensure every detail was right. Each action reminded her of the quiet patience Jack had shown on the mountain. She realized that rushing through the work would have been a mistake. Careful, deliberate effort would keep her animals safe for years to come. When the sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the fields, Maria finally stepped back to admire her work. The pen was no longer fragile. It was strong, secure, and ready for the next storm. Her cattle moved about calmly, sensing the stability of their surroundings. Maria felt a wave of relief and satisfaction. The work had been hard, but it had taught her far more than she expected. She had learned that resilience was built step by step, with patience, observation, and care. That evening, as she settled near the fire in her small home, Maria reflected on her experience with Jack. She realized that the mountain man had not just given her a shelter for the storm, he had given her knowledge, confidence, and a new way to see her world. She thought about the quiet moments on the trail, the careful guidance through the slippery paths, and the steady presence he had offered. It was more than a lesson in construction. It was a lesson in trust, respect, and self-reliance. The next morning, Maria returned to the pen to check on her cattle again. She walked along the edges, inspecting every corner and every plank. She made small adjustments where needed, adding extra support here, clearing debris there. The cattle moved calmly around her, and she felt a deep connection to them. She realized that care was not just about building structures, but about observing, understanding, and responding to their needs. She had always loved her herd, but now she understood them in a new way. Maria decided to take her lessons one step further. She gathered some neighbors and showed them how to reinforce their pens, using techniques she had learned from Jack. She demonstrated how to use natural slopes to direct water, how to strengthen weak points in walls, and how to prepare for storms before they arrived. Her neighbors listened carefully, asking questions and taking notes. Maria felt a sense of pride in sharing her knowledge, knowing that her experience could protect many more animals than just her own. Over the following days, Maria continued to work on her pen and her herd. She experimented with new methods, refined her skills, and observed her animals closely. She found that small changes could make a big difference. A slightly higher floor kept the ground dry longer. A reinforced corner with thicker beams prevented leaks, and careful placement of gates made it easier to move the cattle safely. Every improvement reminded her of the value of patience and observation. As weeks passed, Maria noticed a change in herself. She felt more confident, capable, and prepared. She no longer saw the mountains and storms as threats, but as challenges she could meet with skill and care. I remembered Jack's words often, letting them guide her actions. Observation, care, patience. The land will provide if you respect it. She realized that these principles applied not just to building shelters, but to life itself. One afternoon, Maria paused by the pen and watched the sunset over the fields. The cattle moved quietly under the secure roof. The land was calm after weeks of rain, and she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had faced a storm, trusted a stranger, learned valuable lessons, and applied them to protect her animals and her livelihood. She knew that challenges would come again, but she felt ready. She had gained more than just knowledge. She had gained resilience, skill, and a renewed sense of connection to her land and her animals. As night fell, Maria prepared a simple meal and sat by the fire. She thought about the journey that had begun with the storm, the mountains, and Jack's guidance. She realized that the experience had changed her. She was no longer just a caretaker of her herd. She was a student of the land, a teacher to her neighbors, and a guardian of knowledge and skill. She felt gratitude for the help she had received and pride in what she had accomplished on her own. And so, Maria's days settled into a new rhythm. She continued to care for her herd, improve her shelter, and share her knowledge. She watched the seasons change, storms come and go, and her cattle thrive under her careful watch. She had learned that strength was not just in survival, but in preparation, observation, and the willingness to learn from those who had gone before. Maria often thought of Jack, the mountain man, who had shown her the way. She never forgot his calm guidance, his quiet patience, and his deep respect for the land. His lessons stayed with her, shaping her decisions, her actions, and her understanding of the world. And though she returned to her own home and her own life, a part of her remained in the mountains, carrying the knowledge, the care, and the wisdom she had gained. The following morning, Maria woke early, feeling a quiet sense of purpose. The storm was long gone, leaving behind clear skies, sunlight bouncing off the wet leaves, and the gentle hum of life returning to the land. She stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the fresh, clean mountain air. Her cattle stirred in the pen, moving calmly under the roof she had worked so hard to reinforce. A soft breeze carried the scent of earth and grass, and for the first time in days, Maria felt completely at peace. She walked along the edges of the pen, checking each corner and gate. Every plank was secure, every nail firmly in place. She remembered Jack's careful guidance and the lessons he had shared about observation, patience, and care. She realized how much she had grown since the storm had begun. She was no longer the woman overwhelmed by rain and fear. She was someone who could face challenges with knowledge, confidence, and calm. Her thoughts drifted to her neighbors. Over the past weeks, she had shared what she learned with them, helping reinforce their own pens and teaching them ways to protect their animals. She thought of the pride she had seen in their eyes, the relief in their voices as they realized they could prevent the damage that storms often brought. Maria understood that this knowledge was more than skill. It was a way to protect her community and strengthen the bonds between them. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, a quiet pride in being able to help others. As the morning sun warmed the fields, Maria prepared to inspect her herd more closely. She walked among the cattle, noting their behavior and checking for signs of stress or discomfort. The animals moved calmly around her, sensing the safety of the pen and the care of their owner. Maria felt a connection to them that went beyond responsibility. She understood their moods, their needs, and their routines in a way she never had before. Her confidence in handling them had grown just as much as her ability to build and repair their shelter. Later, Maria decided to explore her land, checking for areas that might need improvement or reinforcement. Noticing spots where water could collect during heavy rain, places where fences could weaken, and areas where the soil had eroded. She took notes, marking places to improve, remembering Jack's advice: observation, care, patience. The land will provide if you respect it. She smiled to herself, realizing that she now truly understood what he meant. The land was not just something to live on. It was something to study, respect, and work with. In the afternoon, Maria's neighbors came to visit. They wanted to see her improved pen and to learn more about the techniques she had learned from Jack. Maria welcomed them warmly, showing them each detail of her construction, explaining why she had made certain choices, and demonstrating how to use natural slopes and reinforced beams to protect the cattle. The neighbors listened carefully, asking questions and taking notes. Maria felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that her experiences could help others avoid the struggles she had faced. As the sun began to lower in the sky, Maria and her neighbors worked together, reinforcing their pens and discussing ways to improve the safety and comfort of their cattle. The sense of community and shared knowledge filled her with joy. She realized that while storms could bring fear and uncertainty, they could also bring opportunity to learn, to teach, and to strengthen bonds. Her herd was safe, her neighbors were learning, and she felt a quiet satisfaction in the knowledge that she was making a lasting difference. That evening, Maria sat by the fire in her small home, reflecting on the journey she had taken. The storm, which had once seemed like an overwhelming challenge, now felt like a turning point in her life. She thought about Jack, the mountain man who had guided her, and she felt deep gratitude. His knowledge had given her the tools not only to protect her cattle, but to grow as a person. She understood now that true strength came not from acting alone, but from learning, observing, and seeking guidance when needed. Maria's mind returned to her herd. She walked to the pen one last time before nightfall, checking on each cow and making sure all the gates were secure. The animals moved calmly, unbothered by the fading light. Maria reached out to touch the head of one of the younger cows. Feeling the warmth and weight of it, she whispered softly, promising to always care for them, protect them, and provide for them. It was a promise she intended to keep, strengthened by the lessons she had learned. Over the next few days, Maria continued to refine her pen and her routines. She built small drainage channels to prevent water from collecting, reinforced corners that showed signs of wear, and adjusted the gates to make moving the cattle easier. Each improvement reminded her of Jack's patience and skill. She realized that attention to detail, careful observation, and deliberate action were as important as strength or determination. Her work was not just physical, It was thoughtful, deliberate, and focused on long-term success. Maria also began keeping a small journal of her observations. She recorded the behavior of her cattle, the effects of weather on the land, and the techniques she was learning to improve her pens. She wrote notes about soil, slopes, and shelter construction, knowing that this record could help her and her neighbors in future storms. She understood now that knowledge was as important as action. A well-prepared mind could prevent disaster even more than a well-built pen. As the weeks passed, the community noticed the changes in Maria and her herd. Her cattle were healthier, calmer, and safer than ever before. Neighbors came to learn from her, bringing their own questions and seeking guidance. Maria shared openly, remembering the patience and generosity Jack had shown her. She realized that leadership and care were not about control or authority. They were about sharing knowledge, empowering others, and building trust. One afternoon, Maria walked through her fields, taking in the changes she had made. The pens were solid, the land was well drained, and her herd moved freely and confidently. She thought about the journey she had taken, from fear and uncertainty during the storm, to the climb up the mountain, to the lessons learned from Jack, and finally to this moment of quiet mastery. She felt pride, not just in what she had accomplished physically, but in the growth she had experienced internally. As the sun set over the mountains, Maria looked toward the distant hills, remembering the mountain man who had guided her. She wondered if he was watching, if he knew how much she had learned and applied. She felt a connection to him, though they were miles apart. His lessons had become a part of her, shaping her decisions, her actions, and her understanding of the world. Maria realized that she was no longer the same person who had faced the storm alone. She had transformed, gaining confidence, skill, and the quiet strength that comes from preparation and knowledge. That evening, Maria sat by the fire, reflecting on the path she had walked. The storm had tested her, pushed her to the edge of her capabilities, and reminded her of her limitations, but it had also opened a door to learning, growth, and connection. She had faced fear, sought help, learned from a master, and applied that knowledge to protect what she loved. She understood now that life was not just about surviving challenges, but about learning from them, improving, and sharing that improvement with others. In the following weeks, Maria continued her routine, always observing, always learning, always caring for her herd. She checked the pens daily, adjusted where needed, and experimented with small improvements. Each action reminded her of the lesson she had received, and she felt a sense of confidence and calm she had never known before. She knew that storms would come again, that challenges were inevitable, but she felt ready to face them, armed with knowledge, skill, and patience. The story of Maria and her herd became known among her neighbors. They respected her not only for her care of the animals, but for her wisdom, her ability to observe and solve problems, and her willingness to share what she had learned. Maria felt a sense of pride and fulfillment, knowing that the storm had not only tested her, but had strengthened her community. She realized that resilience, skill, and knowledge were gifts that grew when shared, and she felt gratitude for having been guided toward them. And so, Maria's life returned to a steady rhythm. She cared for her herd, tended to her land, and shared her knowledge with others. She faced each new challenge with calm and confidence, knowing that she had learned the lessons of patience, observation, and care. The mountains, the storms, and the lessons from the mountain man had shaped her into someone capable, resilient, and wise. She had faced the storm, learned from it, and emerged stronger, not just in her work, but in her understanding of life itself.